Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Black, and Ian Walker Family Law. Today represented by Lev Boreiko, who has got some really valuable experience to share with us later about going through the court system. Today we're going to talk about handling a challenging partner before, during and after your divorce, because even once your divorce is finished, you still have to probably carry on dealing with this person if you have children together. So I'm going to share my screen, give you something to look at other than my face. It should come up soon. There we go. Brilliant. Lev, is that all there?
Yep. It's sharing the screen. It hasn't quite popped up yet.
Oh, it hasn't quite got there yet. Okay. There we go. Okay, so just a really brief introduction. I'm Claire Black. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I'm a master NLP practitioner. I used to be, in my former life, a lawyer. I'm a divorced mum of two teenage boys, 18 and nearly 16 now, and author of a book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. There we go. Now, the aim of the Divorce Support Club is to help you do 7 things. First of all, concentrate on you, not your ex. Secondly, become calm, get clarity, focus on what you can control rather than getting frustrated by what you can't. To see options and choices, because that makes you feel empowered. To communicate more effectively. And finally, to create a new, exciting, vibrant future that you're excited about. So that's our goals. And as I said, today we're going to talk about challenging relationships or dealing with a challenging ex. Now, some examples of the kind of challenging behaviours that I've heard about or seen with clients over the years, and some of them experienced myself, might be putting you down, shouting, arguing a lot, not listening, always believing that they're right. Sometimes an ex who was controlling during the marriage and continues to try and exert control during the divorce process and afterwards. They might do that perhaps by being very difficult around finances, or perhaps they use the children as weapons, or they say things like, well, if you were going to be amicable like you promised, you wouldn't be instructing lawyers right now. So they start to use amicable perhaps as a weapon. Perhaps they badmouth you all over town. Perhaps they get their friends and family on side as well, telling them all sorts of stories. They're flying monkeys. And perhaps they threaten not to let you see your children unless you do X or Y or Z. Or they make things up about you. They tell lies about you to others. And those relationships with those kind of people can leave you feeling very confused, overwhelmed, afraid, powerless, helpless, and angry and frustrated. So what I'm going to do today is just suggest a few things that you could try to take some of your power back, so that you no longer feel like the guy in this picture who's pushing a big rock up a very steep hill and always afraid that it's going to roll back on top of him. So I'm going to give you some choices. So if you keep doing the same thing, of course, you'll keep getting the same result. So it might be time to maybe try something different. So first of all, know really and be really clear about who's who in your support network, because your support team is massively vital. You need good legal advice so that you know what you can do in terms of legal options. And you also need good emotional support. So perhaps consider working with a coach or a therapist to help you to handle your emotions, because often it's your emotions running high that can cause problems with the legal process. And then there are your friends and family. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about those. Be really careful, choose your confidence really, really wisely. When you next spend time with somebody, perhaps start to think, how do I feel when I'm with this person? How do I feel once I've left them? Are they radiators or are they drains? So your radiators are those people who are warm and comforting. When you spend time with them, you feel better, you feel more uplifted, you feel more positive. Perhaps they listen really carefully. Perhaps you feel that they really understand and they care about you, but they don't tell you what to do. Those people who are your drains are almost exactly the opposite. They're the ones when you come away, you feel depleted. Perhaps they're everything you say, there's something worse has happened to them, or perhaps they don't really listen, or they try and tell you what to do. Try and avoid those people and spend time with your radiators. Also have a think about who's your 3 a.m. friend. So who's your friend who at 3 a.m. in the morning, when everything feels really, really dreadful and there's no one else you can call, they're your person. Now, you may never actually need to do it. And you may never, even if you need to, actually pick up the phone. But just knowing that you've got that friend there who you could call if you need to is really powerful. So yes, then people to avoid. So your drains and your energy vampires, the people who suck the energy out of you and leave you feeling drained. Also, though, the drama llamas, I like to call them, these are the people who seem to thrive on the drama, who want to know every little detail. The problem with these people is twofold, really. First of all, it keeps you stuck in telling that story, which helps you to keep feeling those emotions and keep feeling stuck in that story. But also, they're often gossipers, and they will probably talk about you when you aren't there. They get a kick out of hearing your troubles and may not really have anything useful to add. And then there's the if I were you brigade. So when anyone offers me advice that starts with the sentence, if I were you, I would, I remind myself that they are not me. They're not me, they're not in my shoes, they're not in my situation. And if those people are also feeling emotional on your behalf, perhaps they're angry for you, and they suggest that you do things perhaps to exact revenge, they aren't the ones who are going to have to live with the consequences of that either. So just be really careful about people who start sentences with, if I were you. My next tip, remember what you can and you can't control. So I wonder how many times you find yourself asking questions like, why can't my ex just understand this? Or I just want them to listen to me, or stop behaving in this way, or stop saying those things. Now, the first thing to know is that you can't control what they say, what they do, how they behave. It's really important going through a divorce to try and stay in this blue zone. This is what I call the blue zone of power. You can control your words, your thoughts, your behaviors, your efforts, your decisions, your choices, your ideas, your body language, but you can't control someone else's. So other people's words and actions and ideas and behaviors. And when you try to, you step into this, I call it the orange zone of frustration, because they're unlikely to do what you want them to do. And all your energy will then be channeled into trying to get them to do something that they just are not going to do. And it may even be that that's their intention. So if your partner has always been controlling or difficult and challenging, don't expect them to change now. They probably won't suddenly become kind and caring. They won't suddenly grow a conscience, and you're likely to be disappointed. So you need to be able to deal with them as they are, not try to change them. So instead, step into this blue zone and start to think, what could I do differently? How could I say or do or behave differently here that might get a different response? So my first question, whenever something happens and I feel frustrated or angry, is what can I do? My second is what choices do I have and what can I control here? And that helps me to step into that blue zone of power. So when something happens, let's say, I don't know, an email pops into your inbox, or you receive a message, or your text pings, or you know that you've got to meet your ex that afternoon or something like that, you've got to have a meeting. Your emotional brain will go into a stress response. So it will go into one of these 4 states: fight, flight, freeze. And I like to also add flop. So the fight response is perhaps you feel angry, you want to retaliate, you see red. The flight response means that maybe you just want to run away. You feel afraid, you want to ignore it. The freeze response might be you want to give in, you want to surrender. You do exactly what they're asking you to do. And the flop response is you try and please them. So you try and appease, and often that has built up in a pattern over relationships. So really important to have a think about what is your natural go-to stress response when these things pop into your inbox or a text message comes. And what's the first thing to do? So when you have that response, the first thing to do is always to breathe. Because when you go into that fight, flight, freeze, flop, all the oxygen comes from your brain. It goes into making your heart beat faster. It starts, perhaps you start to sweat, or you go red. Perhaps you become very hot. So your energy is going into those things. Now, if you can start to breathe you can overpower your thoughts. And we can do this now. So if you breathe in and count to 5 in your head, and then hold it for 2, and breathe out and count to 7, and then do it again. So breathe in and count to 5, hold for 2, and breathe out and count to 7. And I don't know if you noticed, but my heart rate has slowed down, and it gets oxygen back into your brain, which can help soothe your emotional response and get your logical brain back online, so that you can actually start then to think about how you want to respond. And that takes me into one of my favorite mantras that I use all the time. So stop, breathe, think, respond. Your breath can help you steer clear of those conversations or arguments that always end up in an argument or in conflict. Your breath is a really useful tool, and it's totally free. So I encourage you, when something pops into your inbox and you read it and you feel angry or you feel upset, or you know that you've got a meeting coming up and you're feeling anxious about it, or your phone pings and a message has popped in from your ex, stop and breathe. Use that breathing strategy we looked at just now. Stop and breathe just for a couple of moments, and it can help you to pause, and then you can start to think and respond. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, but when that reaction comes, I don't have time to stop and breathe. Or how will I remember to stop? These feelings are just too strong. And perhaps you feel that your emotional reactions are unstoppable, uncontrollable, and very instinctive. Well, I promise you that you can. The first time will always be the hardest, but every time you do it, the easier it will become. And you will start to create a new neural pathway in your brain that says, okay, I need to stop and breathe now. And what you can do to remind yourself of this is perhaps write this out on a Post-it note, print it out, make a nice little poster like I've done, and stick it on your fridge, stick it on your mirror, stick it by the side of your bed, wherever you need to, stick it there, and so you can see it all the time, and it then will sink more easily into your subconscious. So that's your breathing. And my next tip is to remember that you always have choice. And one of my clients coined this phrase a couple of years ago. So discretionary engagement, she called it. So you always have a choice about whether you respond, when you respond, and how you respond. So you don't need to reply to every message that your ex sends or every question that they ask. You don't need to answer it straight away. You can take your time. You can take advice if you need to. So always remember, it's your choice as to when, how, and whether you respond, and that takes power back into your hands. So I'll just tell you a little story about a client I was working with, Lucy. Her ex used to send her lots and lots of messages. Some of them were very personal and critical. He would sometimes send 40 in one day. And because of how their marriage had been and his expectation that she would always reply quickly, she felt that she had to respond quickly or he would lose his rag. When she realised that she had a choice, that she could take a really deep breath, calm her brain, and then choose whether to respond, how to respond, or even not to respond, she coined this new phrase, discretionary engagement, and it completely changed things for her. She realised that rather than responding straight away, she could leave it in the beginning for 20 minutes, then half an hour, then an hour. She could choose to reflect. She could choose to review her options. She could send a holding message if she wanted, saying, I'm going to take some advice on this and I'll get back to you. And she also realised that she didn't have to respond to those very personal attacks either. So when you respond to those personal attacks, you take yourself right into the conflict. And quite often, you can just ignore them. So here's some examples of some choices you might make. You might decide not to respond at all. You might decide to implement what I call the 24-hour rule. So you leave replying for 24 hours. That gives you a chance to calm down, to sleep on it. It gives your brain time to process what you want to say. You might choose to write an angry response and then file it away but not send it. You might choose to take some advice to get some clarity. Or you might choose to keep a separate folder for any personal attacking messages. Put them in a folder. You don't have to read them again, but you've got them there should you need it. And you might choose to keep a diary of all the things that happen, and perhaps if there are threats made, of all the threats that are made. You might also choose to set up a new email address or get a new phone or turn your notifications off so that you are in charge of when your phone bleeps. Because you can't control when your ex sends you a message, but you can control when you access it. Or you might ask a friend if you can run all your messages past them first. Perhaps you have somebody who you trust who could read things through with you and help you work out what you need to reply to and what you don't. So yeah, you can always choose. Next, you can choose to set boundaries. So what's a boundary, first of all? Well, it's a guideline, a rule, a limit that you create for yourself to identify what behaviours you will accept from other people and how you'll respond when somebody perhaps steps over those limits. Now, I've heard them compared to a screen door. It's a really nice image, actually. They're like a screen door that allows a cool breeze to come in, but it keeps all the insects and the leaves out. And that screen door is under your control. So you can decide whether and how far you open it. If you open it too far, all the leaves and insects can come in, and it can be really hard to A, shut the door again, and B, brush them all out. So it's important to decide on your own boundaries and set limits for your interactions, especially when you're dealing with a challenging person. And I know this can be really scary. So you could start doing it in small ways. There we go. So how do you set a boundary? Well, first of all, it needs to be clear, it needs to be calm, and it needs to be concise. It needs to be put respectfully and in as few words as possible. It needs to clearly set out the consequence, so what you will do if that boundary is overstepped. You don't need to apologise or justify or get angry or say you're sorry or debate for any of the boundaries that you're putting in place. And remember, you aren't responsible for the other person's feelings in reaction to that boundary that you're setting. Some people, especially those who are used to controlling or abusing or manipulating you, will test you on this. So plan on it, expect it, but remain firm. So don't set out a consequence that you know you're going to struggle to keep. So your behaviour needs to match the boundary that you're setting. If you aren't prepared to do what you say you're going to do as a consequence, then don't say it. It's a bit like parenting, I suppose. And remember, you can't make them see or understand or change their thinking. But what you can do is set out your boundary and tell them what you are going to do. So I thought it'd be useful to give you perhaps some examples. So a couple of examples of boundaries. So for example, I'm not going to respond to emails containing personal attacks on me. I will only respond to questions about arrangements for the children. And then you have to do that. I will not tolerate being shouted at. If you continue to shout, I will leave the room. I'm not going to read emails sent to me during working hours. I will reply once I'm free. I need time to think and reflect before I make a decision. I'll respond to you once I've been able to do that. Now, what's really interesting about these is, although you are asking the other person to do something or to stop doing something, the behaviours in response are all owned by you. They are all things that you can control. So you've simply told the other person that if they continue to behave in the way that they're behaving now, you're going to respond differently. And that puts you into that lovely blue zone of control. So think through some of these in advance. Perhaps start with a small one. Practice saying them in front of a mirror. Practice with a friend. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become. And the first time you do it, when it works, it will feel absolutely amazing. You'll feel really empowered. So you can also set boundaries for yourself. So you can control, for example, your written side of communication. So set yourself some guidelines around how you want to be in your communication. These guidelines here were created by me with a client a year and a half or so ago. He had a very difficult ex-wife who really was intimidating to him. And he decided that in his written communication, he would make sure he was clear, he was polite, he was businesslike, factual, assertive, unemotional, to the point, and careful with his language. So he was going to avoid things like, you must do this, you should feel like that, you never X, Y, and Z, or you always do A, B, and C. Those things are bound to end in a conflict, in a kind of angry response. And he kept this by his computer, and every time he wrote an email or a message to his ex-wife, he ticked off, have I been clear, polite, businesslike, etc., etc. And that really helped him to keep himself on track in his own communication. So moving away slightly from sort of written communication, another really useful strategy to start to use if you're dealing with somebody very challenging is to be a bit like a grey rock And there's lots and lots of information about this method on the internet if you want to go and have a search about it. So if your ex is very difficult and they seem to enjoy and thrive on causing you stress, then consider using this technique. It's widely advised to people who are dealing with somebody who's quite narcissistic on the other side and from whom they can't cut contact. Perhaps you have children together. So their behaviours might include being very selfish, demanding, they don't care how you feel, they respond very badly to criticism or disagreement with their perspective, and they feel entitled to special treatment, so you must respond very quickly. They believe they're right and they never apologise. So these people will enjoy the fight and will get a kick out of the conflict. So being a grey rock is almost entirely the opposite of that. So what you do is you imagine that they're a stranger that you have no emotional attachment to at all. You become as boring as possible. You make all your interactions as short and as uninteresting as possible. So you don't engage in any back and forth conversation. You keep your communication to a minimum. You keep your communication very factual. You don't give anything away about your feelings. You don't tell them any personal information or anything about your emotions. Don't argue with them. This gives them what they want. Sometimes if you can find something in one of their messages to agree with, that can be a really useful thing to bring into this as well. So you don't try and make them understand or try to explain yourself, because that's totally counterproductive. And you can be like a stuck record if you want to. I'm not willing to discuss that right now. I need to take advice on this. Being amicable doesn't mean I roll over and do what you say. Being amicable means us both showing up and taking part in this process. And you set your boundaries and you stick to them. One really important thing to remember about this method of communication is that you don't tell them that you're using it. The goal in this is to take away the kind of reward of added conflict and added drama by being really, really boring. And if you tell them that's what you're doing, then you'll defeat the object. Be really aware that quite often people will not respond well to this. They might up the ante as they won't like you being like a grey rock. So you may have to go through a little period of time where you need to be really strong and don't respond to their responses, which might be very angry or accusatory or prodding. A bit like a child throwing their toys out the pram. So what else can you do? You can also use your imagination to help you. This is really useful, especially when you need to meet your ex perhaps face to face. So when you have to meet face to face, make sure that you're prepared. Think about what you're going to wear. Wear something that will help you to feel really confident. Wear something that will help you to feel dignified and strong. Hold your head up high. Imagine that you're wearing a Teflon coat and it's got slopey shoulders, and any words, nasty words or personal attacks, they come in at you like arrows, but they slide off. You could also imagine that you have an invisible force field around you. I had a client recently who imagined that every time she had to have a conversation with her ex, she was wearing a massive space helmet. It kept her safe. It meant that all the words he was using kind of bounced off the edges. You could imagine that you're attending a business meeting, and you could also perhaps see them as something funny. So sometimes your ex will take up a lot of space in your mind. Perhaps you see them as quite big and overpowering. If you could start to change how you see them in your mind, perhaps you start to see and hear them a bit like Kevin the teenager, or you put clown shoes on them, or you give them little Minnie Mouse ears and make them speak like Donald Duck in your mind. That will help to introduce something that's a little bit funny, and it will take the power out of their presence in your mind. You could also prepare some exit lines as well, and that's not on the slide, but prepare some exit lines that you can practice and practice and practice. And then when your brain needs to use them, it will know exactly what it is that you want to say. And then lastly, please remember to put the glass down. When you're dealing with somebody challenging, it can be really tiring, it can be very exhausting, it can deplete your energy. And there's a really lovely story that I heard recently. So a psychologist is walking around a room and he's teaching stress management to his audience and raises a glass of water. And he says to the audience, how heavy is this glass of water? And they all reply back various different weights. And the psychologist replies and said, well, actually the absolute weight doesn't matter because it depends on how long I hold it for. If I hold it for a minute, it's not a problem. If I hold it for an hour, my arm will ache. If I hold it for a day, my arm will be numb and paralysed. And in each case, the weight of the glass doesn't change, but the longer I hold it, the heavier it becomes. And the stresses and worries of life and divorce are very much like this glass of water. If you think about them for a while, nothing happens. If you think about them a bit longer, they start to hurt. And if you think about them all day long, you'll feel paralysed and you may find that you can't do anything and you feel stuck. So please, please give yourself permission to put the glass down. Do some things that you enjoy. Do something kind for yourself every day. You could decide that you're only going to read emails perhaps between 4 and 5 o'clock on each day. And outside of that, you're going to not think about it. Keep your list of things that you enjoy and your friends that you can call on to hand, so you can call on it when you need to. And make a promise to do something for yourself every single day, because to look after yourself has got to be a top priority right now. Make sure you get some exercise, make sure you're eating. If you're finding it difficult to eat, perhaps eat little and often. I know I found that easier when I was getting divorced than trying to eat 3 meals like I used to. Make sure you drink enough water, but really, really important to look after yourself. So those are my top tips for dealing with and looking after yourself when you're handling somebody very tricky on the other side. Lev, anything that you'd like to add to any of that?
No, it's quite interesting to listen to that, because I think a lot of what you said is applicable to a legal scenario as well. It's not something that you can just do with your partner at home. It's something that you can practice in court, and a lot of it relates to what we actually do in court as practitioners as well. So practice does make perfect. Absolutely.
I'm really interested as well, actually, to hear, because I know that you've got lots and lots of experience working within the court system. So that's why we invited you along today to share some of that with us. So do you have any top tips for clients who are perhaps, because a lot of these cases with very challenging ex-partners, some of them do end up in court because that's one way to sort of get the process moving. One of the things that some of these very challenging people will do is refuse to engage, so you're forced almost to go into the court process. So do you have any top tips that would really help our listeners?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I could recommend, and I think kind of linking to your presentation, I think will be a good way to approach it. One of the main things of going to court is being prepared. I advise a lot of my clients or individuals that just want ad hoc advice to sit down and actually think about what they want to say. Okay, so linking it back to this blue zone of power. Okay, you control what you say to the courts. So you are entitled to take in a note, whether that's bullet points, whether that's paragraphs, whether that's sticky notes, whatever helps you to remember the main points you want to get across, then do it. Okay, you can't control what the other person's going to say. Okay, but what you can try to do is effectively anticipate their actions. Okay, if you can put yourself in their shoes and try to think forward, you can effectively plan when things like that come up in court. That will hopefully then reduce the anxiety, the pressure, the stress that you are going to feel. Okay, so top tip number 1 is preparation. Okay, top tip number 2, okay, is to stay calm and try not to feel pressurized. The court for a lot of people is a scary place, and I think that largely comes up from a lot of dramas that individuals see on TV or anything that they might have heard or read about. The family court is not like a criminal practice. Judges don't wear gowns, they don't wear wigs, they don't sit higher above you and look down on individuals. That they are normal people. A lot of the judges, they will have children of their own. Some judges have gone through the breakup process themselves, so they can relate to what you are saying. Okay, linking it to kind of what you said, Claire, is that stop and breathe. What I see, especially when I see litigants in court, is that they want to respond straight away. They want to react to things straight away. Take a breath, think about what you want to say. judges appreciate that if you're doing court by yourself, is that you're not used to that environment. No one's going to hold it against you if you say, can I have a second to think about what I need to say?
That's a really good line to practice in advance, standing in front of your mirror before you go into anything like that, to get used to saying, I need a moment. Can you give me a moment to have a think? I need just 5 seconds. Yeah.
Absolutely. Another top tip, and I think a lot of people forget this, if you are going to go to court, don't forget to bring something to drink and eat. If you are going to be in court for a little while, naturally, if you're not drinking and eating, your body will react to it. So don't forget. And I think if you are in court and you need to speak to a judge or a bench, if it's that way, try to be as factual as possible. What you've got to remember is that judges or benches, if you're on the magistrates court, they know the law. Ideally, what they don't want is, I remember it this way, or subjective comments and opinions. The more you can link things to an objective point of view, i.e. a third party saw this, or here's a letter from my GP, or here's a letter from my counsellor, the better, because it provides an individual and objective view. Two people coming from two very subjective positions is not going to give a court any indication as to the true position. And
I guess the court is not there, is it, to make a judgment as to whose story is correct or whose story is nearest to the truth. And we all, because we all have such a different way of viewing the world, I might view an event that happens in a totally different way to the other person who was involved, and that's normal. So the court isn't really there to resolve disputes about what happened and when, is it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, for most people, that's 100% correct. So that side of things, you are completely right.
I guess is it only in situations where there's allegations of abuse and things like that you're looking at the facts of that, and that's probably a different topic to talk about.
Yeah, very much so. I think my last little point that I noted down, and I think I linked it to your discretionary engagement, is that what I tend to find, especially in cases or when you are going to court, there is a lot of information that is being put forward or being said. Half that information will, quite frankly, be irrelevant to what you're trying to resolve. Taking children matters, for example, for a lot of people, they go to court to resolve how often they're going to have the children, how time they have the children. But what tends to happen is people get sidetracked insofar as, 4 weeks ago, you made this comment to me. And the whole case takes a swerve to one side, where people are arguing about what happened on a given day and forget why they're in court. Okay, so you don't need to respond to every single comment that you're in court. It's just the pertinent points in relation to why you're there in trying to resolve the overall case. So sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and think to yourself, why am I here? What am I trying to resolve?
Yeah, what's the outcome that I'm moving towards here? Yes. So that what might really be helpful, and I'm just thinking in terms of coaching around that, might be to have a piece of A4 paper or a piece of A3 paper with the desired, what it is that you're there for. What's the purpose of this, so you don't get drawn off into, sidetracks about something completely different. What's the vision? What is it you're trying to get to? What's the question that you're looking for an answer to? And to keep that there right in front of you.
Yep.
Yeah. I know that I've had clients in the past who have also, I don't know if this is still true after the pandemic, so just wanted to check, if they were going to a hearing in person, actually in the courthouse, you can go and visit, you can go and have a look beforehand. I've had clients who've gone to the court and to say, I've got a hearing here next week, I'd like to have a look around, please, make sure I can find where the toilets are, all of that kind of thing. Is that still possible to do?
It's a little bit hard to answer that question because it largely depends on which court you go to,
Right.
which I appreciate is not what listeners want to hear. Different courts are a little bit more accommodating. I mean, in no court building can you go into the hearing room itself, because usually Monday to Friday judges are sitting in there. Some courtrooms will allow you to go into the court building, but most of these buildings are standard office blocks. There is no grandeur, there's not going to be any pillars, and there's not going to be statutes with judges.
No gavel being banged and all of that kind of stuff. But I guess even if you can go and look at the outside and reassure yourself that this is an ordinary looking building on an ordinary corner, it's not the Old Bailey, then that's a good idea. And I suppose you can always ring, you could always ring the court and ask if it's possible to go inside and sort of locate where the important things are for you. So it's worth doing to go and to ask if you can do that.
Very much so. One point to also mention, I think, which will be helpful, if you are expecting your partner to be difficult, or you don't want to see your partner, or due to historic events, okay, most court offices do provide a facility for a separate room, separate entrances, separate exits, okay, screens in the courtrooms themselves if you're required to do so. You can even go as far as asking whether to join a hearing via video if, for example, you are extremely stressed, anxious, or whatever it may be. So the court are usually very accommodating, but you should ask. So ring them a couple of weeks before, explain to the court office, or email them, and most court offices are extremely flexible and are willing to kind of meet an individual's needs.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know, isn't it? So that's really helpful in terms of, make sure that you're prepared, have some strategies to stay calm, don't forget to bring stuff to eat and drink, and really keep the outcome that you're trying to get to in the fore of your mind so that you don't get kind of sidetracked off in a different direction. Massively helpful. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Okay, I'm just going to check and see if there aren't any questions at the moment. So I will, what I will do now is we'll come to a finish, and I will email out a link to the recording for everybody who wasn't able to be on the call today. So you can watch it in your spare time and at your leisure. And we will be in touch about the next monthly meeting of the Breakup Club, of the Divorce Support Club, very shortly. So thank you very much, Lev, for coming along, and hopefully you'll come back again another time and perhaps share some more of your expertise with us.
Of course.
I'm just going to press stop on the record. So thank you, everybody.